Right now, coming up, is the mysterious case of the Rust shooting. And I have been meaning to cover this for a while, really be able to truly examine this and start looking at it, in depth. The Rust shooting involving actor Alec Baldwin and the alleged incident which occurred with Miss Halyna Hutchins and the other victim, director Joel Souza, on the Bonanza Creek Ranch, right there off of Santa Fe, New Mexico. It's a very important case. And then afterward, I'll be doing a most important update that I've been working on regarding the Andrew Tate case. So look forward to that. Here we go. This is Rust, the Alec Baldwin incident. Thank you. Heard a lot of different interesting stories, kind of back and forth on this, right? One of the key elements that I wish for all of you to be really pondering is when we looked at the prop gun company, and we started really looking at what the props experts were saying, they stated that there was more than one round in the chamber, didn't they? Yeah. And in the situation of how this was unfolding in the exact manner that it did, they stated that there was at least one live round that was also left in the chamber, according to some of the prop company experts and the prop affiliate company. So that's a very important detail that's kind of been skipped over a bit, a lot for some reason that people haven't really been pointing out as much. And it's a very key detail when it comes to anything that ends up occurring in this case. So on October 12th, or on October 21st, 2021, a shooting incident occurs in New Mexico that involves actor Alec Baldwin during the production of the upcoming movie Rust. According to official reports, Baldwin was rehearsing a scene for the film in which he was aiming a gun directly at the camera. So he wasn't just running out there and doing kind of a review scene, okay? He wasn't practicing, right? This wasn't really about practice, so to speak, at this point. He was aiming a gun, a real gun that he knew from the company who he had been updated on, throughout this process, had issues around that gun, and he was aiming it directly at the camera. So during this rehearsal, the gun held by Baldwin fired and hit the film's cinematographer, Halyna Hutchins, and the film's director, Joel Souza. Hutchins was airlifted to a local hospital where she was pronounced deceased at the scene. Souza sustained non-life-threatening injuries and was also hospitalized and then released the following day. So the argument can't be made anymore, as far as I'm aware, that the gun was just a normal cold gun, that he was just going through the motions, right? To be able to practice for some kind of upcoming scene. Because it states in some of these official reports in relation to the gun company itself, and also even the autopsy, that he aimed the gun directly at the camera, right? And he fired the gun. There was no real practice. There was no, he's going through the motions. Oh, we need to see how this is going to really be affected on set. He just kind of picked up the gun, aimed it, and fired. And the most important element I wish for some of you guys to truly pay attention to, right? Again, during this, is a law enforcement investigation also revealed that the gun could not have misfired. So the fact that the initial investigation and also some of the reports finally that we get back from the prop gun company indicates that the gun was not just a regular prop and that the gun could not have misfired, right, is a major, major issue in this incident and vital to understanding what truly happened here. So I wish for all of you to really be pondering that. I mean, what are your real feelings and thoughts and ideas as well when we start looking at the overall issue from that wider perspective? The Santa Fe County Sheriff's Office investigated the shooting following the incident, the day that it occurred. The gun was not supposed to have any live rounds, yet now we know, according to the actual company and the prop company, right, it contained a few interesting rounds in there, at least one of them an active live round, didn't it? Yeah, that's right. And that's something that's a vital key to understanding exactly what truly happened here. The individuals involved made conflicting claims regarding who fired or who failed to check the gun itself to see if it was safe to handle before being used. Alec Baldwin subsequently gave an interview where he stated that he didn't touch the trigger. Of course, this was implying it was an accident and was subsequently proven to have been a lie. So that's a major issue that's been involved here, right? So I just desire you guys to certainly ponder that. That means that the company that was handling the guns, that actually deals with these issues each day, knew that the gun was unsafe. They knew that there was at least one round in the chamber, right? So they knew that they had some kind of ongoing problem with some of these key props, especially with Baldwin's gun. And yet Baldwin didn't really bring that up. He didn't really say anything. And you find that just a bit interesting. So I want you to ponder that, deeply. And really, what are your thoughts and feelings on that? How do you see the approach that was taken here? So they implied that the gun went off by accident, yet according to official reports and the forensics done, what Alec Baldwin did was very intentional. Although still a type of accident, right? He intentionally fired this gun, which is a key issue. According to Sheriff Adán Mendoza, the gun used by Alec Baldwin in the Rust shooting was a F3 Pieta long Colt .45 single-action revolver. The production had chosen this gun for its historical accuracy, being designed in 1873 and notable for its advancement over previous prior firearms. In Western movies, for example, in the Old West, and by Western movies, right, they're talking about, the midnight cowboy, the good, bad, and the ugly. Things that are very famous out there on the scene. And yet something else happened here, didn't it? That cannot be suggested that it was just simply someone having an accident or having an incidental issue occur. Something very different happened here. The Colt .45 revolver is as well known for big name stars as the stars who hold them. This includes people all the way back to Clint Eastwood. So it's a very interesting part that needs to always truly be included, right? If one is to fully understand what happened during this whole unfolding issue. They were chosen by the Western Outlaws and Hollywood Productions for the exact same reason described: the intimidating presence and ability to inflict heavy damage or explosions. The production found the revolver at a gun shop in Albuquerque, New Mexico, in working condition. Crew members reportedly fired the revolver prior to the day of the incident, which would explain why a real bullet was left in the gun. So they had checked it many times, at least more than once, yet there was still a live round. There was still a different, a different style of round that was left in the chamber that you can't really, you can't mix up. There isn't a way to mistake that. And that's one of the very key issues that always should be at the forefront when examining this story. Normally, a crew member would inspect the gun before being handled by an actor. In most movies, the armorer is usually tasked with ensuring firearm safety for all those who are on set prior to any actions taken. On this movie, the set armorer was 25-year-old Halyna Gutierrez-Reed, daughter of the famous movie armorer and exhibition shooter Thel Reed. Her age and relative inexperience as a set armorer comes under scrutiny when it is concerning how this tragedy unfolded. Another report, although we don't usually give those too much credence, I would say, folks, when it's a kind of FBI-related reports and so forth. But anyway, they did several other reports, and during the forensic audit of the FBI report as well, they simply concluded that the Colt 45 could not have been fired without someone pulling the trigger in a deliberate manner, correct? And that's a simple fact that a lot of people who have covered this story have chosen to overlook. But it's a serious issue when it comes to truly understanding why this event occurred and how we can ensure that this type of issue, doesn't occur. Because this was clearly, as they say, in a lot of respects, an intentional accident. It was certainly something that's absolutely what you don't expect to encounter. And that's why there are some specific issues that have come out regarding what Alec Baldwin did all the way along. It contradicts Baldwin's first original claim that he didn't pull the trigger. They performed several tests with the revolver and determined that the firing pin could not have released by itself, right? And that the trigger was in fact pulled. So he took that so-called prop gun and he aimed and fired it, knowing that it's possible there were significant problems based upon the original reports, that were released about what was going on with these guns. Prosecution files involuntary manslaughter charges against Alec Baldwin and Halyna Gutierrez-Reed. In February, therefore, New Mexico prosecutors announced they were filing manslaughter charges against Alec Baldwin and Halyna Gutierrez-Reed as a result. special investigator for the district attorney, or the DA's office, Robert Schilling, wrote in his probable cause statement that Alec Baldwin had lacked sufficient firearms training, failed to respond to crew concerns over gun safety, and pointed the weapon at the victims with his finger on the trigger in a haphazard fashion. He writes, "This reckless deviation from known standards and protocols directly caused this fatal shooting." That's a very important point that truly needs to always be kept at the forefront, folks. So when you really ponder this, remember that statement. This reckless deviation from known standards, practice, or protocol directly caused this fatal shooting. And what are some of your thoughts around that? Go ahead and share that also in the comments below. So Mr. Baldwin and Gutierrez-Reed are charged with involuntary manslaughter, a misdemeanor in New Mexico. This charge carries a sentence of up to 18 months and could have been extended to 5 years under a new firearm enhancement law. However, this enhancement charge was dropped after the defendant's lawyer had argued this event occurred before the new law was enacted. But again, Alec Baldwin is a very seasoned actor. He's not someone who would not know these key issues, is he? Yeah, and so that's one of the very interesting aspects of this that's always been there, especially, for me, that's been there at the forefront of this. And it's going to be very vital that they add some of those key criminal aspects and criminal elements of the charge back in. I need to preface this by saying, no, I myself don't have, for example, a degree in criminal forensics or criminology. I have, however, worked a lot with behavior analysis, and I have experience in studying criminal law and behavior analysis for more than about 20 years. So when we're looking at this video, what I want you guys to pay very special attention to, and pay close attention to this fact, is we see Alec Baldwin here, right? And he's moving his fingers around a huge amount, right? More than you would normally expect with someone who's just, they just got off work and they're just going through a daily routine. He kind of begins to slightly twitch his fingers in an interesting fashion. So let's take a look, okay?
But I don't think it's a great idea. I think this is,
Just to be clear, no one will meet me staying here tomorrow anyway to talk to my insurance investigators. This is really about talk to you more, but I'm just saying.
So sorry, you must have such you must be so charming.
No. What I am is someone who I don't want to do this for a living anymore. I don't want to be a public person. And I'm the one holding the gun in my hand that everybody was supposed to have taken care of. They always hand me a cold gun. She tell you what's going on.
So we get this sense, right away, especially I certainly begin to get a sense of he's very concerned about something that is not being spoken, something that he's not saying, right? And so the sign that Alec Baldwin, in this particular case, right, is holding back a lot and is not saying what actually happened or what actually took place there on set, during the time when Halyna Hutchins would be going over certain conditions and certain issues that were being addressed at the time, is the fact he's holding his phone, right? Sometimes he puts his two hands together and he rubs his fingers a little bit back and forth. But most of the time he's actually holding his phone directly out in front. and he's kind of twitching his fingers just a bit, rubbing, along the sides of his phone, and also rubbing each part of his hand at different times. And so what this indicates, folks, is Alec Baldwin is clearly lying by omission. He's holding key elements of the story back that he doesn't want to be seen, for obvious reasons, on camera in the area where he's located here at the time. But he doesn't want the person that he is supposedly interviewing, in this case his wife and the other person that he calls, that he doesn't want them to know that what he's deliberately doing is hiding the true story, right? He doesn't want anyone to know that he's hiding what actually really happened during the Rust shooting. And this is a key issue, to really examine and to address. He's fidgeting with his hands in kind of a way that is not easy to ignore. And what it tells you is that he's hiding. He's hiding a lot of key details, which, if exposed, would show exactly what happened there on the set, right, when this incident ends up occurring.
I'm trying to get Victor to come. I think we should come.
Okay. He moves his hand around a lot, like a matter of fact. I think that we need to address this. I think someone needs to come out. It's because, right, folks, it's because of a nervousness that he has, right, about something not going according to plan in the overall story as it's presented. In the story that's known so far, on the set for the shooting that happened during this kind of Rust scenario, and also some of the other issues that come up Alec Baldwin was directly involved with. We can see that by the way that he fidgets, kind of open palm, keeps his hand out. He keeps putting that out there, in front of the cameras, like, look, I don't have anything to hide. And yet we know, based upon the testimony that's given and offered here, we know for a fact, right? Alec Baldwin is hiding what actually happened and what occurred, during the incident, what occurred during that shooting. That's certainly what I grasp from it. And anyway, what are your feelings? What are your overall views and thoughts? Do you think that may indeed be the case? That he has a lot that he's thinking about? That he has quite a few things that he's hiding? Let's listen to this.
Here, and they're going to do what they got to do with the deal, what they got to do with, and we shouldn't let them. We'll go. I won't work, and we'll go enjoy ourselves. It's all paid for, and they're not going to give us the money back.
And we should be staying away from the vultures here.
Are they outside?
No, but I imagine they will be. At some point, they're going to find out.
It's a great idea. You should come for that reason also.
Enough, right? But hey, let's play.
The first rehearsal that the incident happened?
Yeah, I believe so, because we talked about, as we were going to lunch, we always talked about what's next.
Okay.
So as we were rehearsing scenes, he said, now I want to do a scene where we've done other shots before lunch. He said, when we come back from lunch, we'll do this. And he said, I want you to pull out and show me. Because I was showing you what I thought was the best angle to see the glint of the gun under my coat. Because you want the scene to work, the shot to work. So where the holster's here, the gun is here, my coat comes around, and I held my hand like it was like I was just cupping my hands. Like I was just resting.
Okay.
And I showed him in the rehearsal. So when we came back after lunch, we rehearsed for the camera, and I took the gun. I really am showing him. I'm going to go like.
Right. So, and this whole thing is not going to be played for any reason, but it's what I want you to pay very close attention to, right? That we certainly find very interesting is Alec Baldwin doesn't respond right away. He places his hands and arms up around just the back of his head, like you would when you're trying to relax, that sort of thing. And when he does that, he kind of cups his hands a little bit. So what that indicates, folks, is he doesn't want to, he just doesn't want to reveal the real story. He's kind of telling a partial version of events of what actually happened on the Rust set. And you can tell that that's done for a very specific purpose. He's concealing key details, key information that would likely be something that could be used against him in some fashion or some form. So what he's doing is he's saying, you see him kind of motion to his shirt and kind of cup around his shirt a lot. And what that indicates, right, is Alec Baldwin is very nervous about certain issues that are not being addressed, and that he doesn't wish to really get into detail about in the interview, right? And one of those issues would be how they find Halyna Hutchins after the shooting has occurred. So he's basically explaining, it was just a simple mistaken coincidence. The firearm was holstered, right? He says he had it holstered in the correct area, correct lane for the pin, but really it wasn't securely fastened. It wasn't, securely holstered in any kind of real sense. It was just more as a prop. It was just really more set up deliberately as a prop. And so he's not being forthcoming. He's being, right? I mean, what do you guys feel as you really kind of listen to this a little more and get into the details of it? What are your ideas and thoughts on it? My sense of it has always been he's deliberately holding key information back. He's not being forthcoming about what happened, and that's a little understandable, right? Given the kind of situation that's occurring around Mr. Baldwin and the kind of dilemma he found himself facing, right? But again, you have to pay very close attention to his arms. Take a look at the way that he kind of palms his open palms across his clothing a lot. Things like this.
I don't remember. I mean, everybody freaked out. All I knew was the gun went off. She hit the floor. He hit the floor. He started screaming. He was in a lot of pain. She went into shock. She didn't talk.
Right.
Her eyes are rolling back in her head.
And then I want to come back to this. You said that when the gun went off, you experienced no kick.
Yeah, there was no recoil. There was no recoil. But I remember.
Okay.
I mean, literally, I'm holding the gun.
So there we can tell that he's actually lying a little bit here, right? He's saying there was no recoil. There was no sudden movements. But yet he's clenching his hands together very, very closely like this, right? And so what that indicates, he's kind of rubbing his hands together a little bit. What that indicates is he is deliberately exaggerating events to a certain extent, He's hiding key information, right? Through lies by omission. And therefore he is kind of concocting a story that sounds similar to what may have really happened, but is not at all, the case, of course, of what truly actually happened on the set. I want you to pay very close attention to that for a moment. This is a key issue and a key detail here.
Gun. And when I slowly pulled, turned, cop, bang. As soon as I cocked the bang, and I jumped. I mean, you obviously, that's the last thing you think is going to happen.
So what he believes, at this point, he sets out his hands like this is the last thing that I could foresee happening. You could tell that at that stage, when he's putting his hands out there in kind of this open position, that he's telling it more like he's telling a story. Like the old tall tales of Paul Bunyan or similar things like that they tell around the campfire. And it works really well. It's very, very professionally done. And he knows exactly what he's doing, wouldn't you say, folks, right? He knows exactly what he's conveying here. But what it is it's actually a story. And it's a story that Alec Baldwin has told himself about what happened so that he essentially doesn't have to face the real consequences, right, of what truly most certainly happened there during the Rust shooting. And one of those was he just picked up a gun out of nowhere. There's certain things that are in the legal paperwork about that. But he picked it up, and he aimed it and he fired. He didn't, look at it or examine it or kind of check it or do any of the things that are normally the requirement. He just picked up a gun, he aimed it, and he fired. This is something that's not revealed to any real extent, during this interesting interview. But it is absolutely essential to be able to see how he kind of maneuvers his hands. He maneuvers his hands around a piece of paper, then he maneuvers them around a phone. And he's kind of rubbing his fingers a little bit, isn't he? Up against the paper, up against his own phone and stuff like this. And so what that indicates is he's not being forthcoming. He's deliberately not being truthful. Thank you. She sustained a very severe injury that came, into the stem that caused irreparable damage to her head, to the cranial area, and so on. And it was quite horrific. When she was airlifted, she was then airlifted to a nearby hospital in New Mexico, where she was declared deceased, and they alleged that occurred on the exact same time frame that Rust was finishing some of its final shooting scenes. Earlier Friday, cinematographer Halyna Hutchins was killed on the New Mexico set for the film Rust, after she was allegedly shot by a prop gun fired by the film star and leading producer Alec Baldwin. IATSE Local 44 News, who covers the prop masters, sent out an email to all of its members Friday morning that stated the gun used in the scene contained a live single round in the chamber, and the production's prop master was not a member of Local 44. Director Joel Souza also was hit and injured by a bullet and was treated at an area hospital before being released. It's quite horrific. And what was worse, folks, is I'll show also some examples of that gun at some point here, right? What was worse is that there was certainly more than one live round that was found in that chamber, or may have well been found in that chamber, based upon prior written reports, because the individual involved, Mrs. Gutierrez-Reed, had a history, kind of a real history to her use of those particular types of guns and doing the same similar things. So it's a key issue that has to also be brought in. Sheriff's deputies were dispatched to the Bonanza Creek Ranch, a popular filming location directly next to Santa Fe. No charges were filed at the time, and the incident remains under investigation. The sheriff's office confirms that 2 individuals were shot on the set of Rust. Halyna Hutchins, age 42, and director of photography Joel Souza, age 48, were shot when a prop firearm was discharged by leading actor and producer Alec Baldwin. The statement reads from the Sheriff Department website. Miss Hutchins was transported via helicopter to the University of New Mexico Hospital, where she was pronounced deceased by medical personnel. Mr. Souza was transported by ambulance to Christa St. Vincent Regional Medical Center, where he is undergoing treatment at this time for his injuries. So he's still undergoing some type of surgery, okay, which makes this feel all the more real and, difficult to fathom, most certainly. The investigation remains open and active. No charges were filed in regard to the incident. Witnesses are continuing to come forward. Mr. Baldwin was questioned by investigators and released. The Santa Fe County Sheriff's Office spokesman Juan Rios told the New York Times the incident happened in the middle of a scene which was rehearsed for the film set. We are trying to determine right now how and what type of projectile was used in the firearm. In the email that IATSE Local 44 sent to its members, Secretary-Treasurer Anthony Pauluc described the event as an accidental weapons discharge in which a live single round was accidentally fired on set by the principal actor, hitting both the director of photography, Local 600 member Halyna Hutchins, and director Joel Souza. Local 44 has confirmed that the props, set decoration, special effects, and construction departments were staffed by New Mexico crew members. The International Cinematographers Guild released the following statement on Thursday. We received the devastating news this evening that one of our members, Halyna Hutchins, the director of photography on a production called Rust in New Mexico, a mother and a sister, died from injuries sustained on the set. The details are unclear at this moment, but we are working diligently to learn everything we can, and we support a full investigation into the tragic episode. This is a terrible loss, and we mourn the passing of the member of our guild family. Hutchins, who was based in Los Angeles at the time, graduated from AFI in 2015. She was then named one of American cinematographer's rising stars of 2019. She previously worked as an investigative journalist on documentaries in Europe, according to her website. The Ukraine native's credits included Pollyanna McIntosh's horror film Darlin, which premiered at the SXSW in 2019, and Adam Egypt Mortimer's Arch Enemy, which premiered at the Beyond Fest of last year, as well as Mike Nell's Blind Fire. Her recent Instagram posts include a video of her riding horseback in New Mexico on the day off of the production from set, and a photo of the film's cast and crew alongside a message with IATSE Solidarity. There she is. It's quite tragic, Looking back, it's a real tragedy for everyone. Rust starred Baldwin as the outlaw Harland Rust, whose grandson is convicted of an accidental murder. CAA Media Finance and Highland Film Group launched sales on the film's Red Carpet Cannes Festival at the virtual market. Fatal on-set gun incidents in Hollywood history have included Brandon Lee, who died while shooting the 1994 film The Crow, and John Eric Hexum, who died while shooting an episode of the 1984 CBS TV series Cover Up. In Hexum's particular case, he held this gun while simulating Russian roulette. Mr. Lee died when cast member Michael Masser fired the gun in a routine scene. Very interesting. And there you have it. This has been quite a tragic incident. to experience. And feel free to add your own comments as well. Thank you. Guys to be aware of here is we've heard a lot from the press, that we need to be particularly concerned about Mr. Baldwin's welfare, and to be honest, in this particular regard, I say that we don't need to necessarily be truly concerned for Mr. Baldwin's welfare as much as we need to be obviously concerned for the welfare of Halyna Hutchins' family, the family of the victims in this particular case, the family of Mr. Souza and the family of Mrs. Hutchins in specific, and what they are going through at this time. Mr. Baldwin, and we've touched on that, of course, he had his personal problems. He had certainly some possible mental problems going on. He had the stress perhaps going on of the debt that he carried. But Mr. Baldwin, he's a millionaire. I mean, in a way, he's kind of untouchable in the scene, as it were. So I feel like it goes without saying that we most certainly should not be as concerned for Mr. Baldwin's welfare in this regard as we should be concerned for the victims and for Hutchins' family, who is barely, coming out the other side of this as we speak right now. And I think it's very interesting. When we look at it that way, there was a wanton disregard in some sense, right, folks? You could make the argument that there was a wanton disregard for safety protocols. Stated on February 7th of 2023, the Santa Fe-based district court, the defense attorneys for Mr. Baldwin sought to disqualify the special prosecutor in the case stemming from the shooting of cinematographer Halyna Hutchins on the set. A district attorney in Santa Fe fought back Monday against efforts to disqualify the special prosecutor pursuing manslaughter charges against actor Alec Baldwin in the fatal shooting of a cinematographer on the New Mexico film set. Mr. Baldwin's legal team in February sought to disqualify special prosecutor and Republican State Representative Andrea Reed of Clovis based on constitutional provisions that safeguard the separation of powers between different branches of the government. And again, there's no reason, to keep arguing back and forth on that. Mr. Baldwin most certainly had the right of way. He had the leading role, so to speak, to know that his actions were certainly, wrong, right? Were certainly criminally negligent in a large respect when it concerns certain key issues here. Defense attorneys had argued that Reeves' role as the state lawmaker and prosecutor are incompatible and could distort legislative and judicial actions, including the state spending time on the prosecution of Mr. Baldwin. Santa Fe District Attorney Mary Carmack Altwise on Monday called the objection a novel theory that has no support. She said that the Constitution for New Mexico provides a variety of key safeguards against legislatures to ever interfere with the outcome of an ongoing case. Any attempt by Miss Reed as a legislator to influence the outcome of this trial will be ineffective. Since joining the legislature in January, Ms. Reed has steered clear of voting on public spending to prosecute Alec Baldwin and film set weapons supervisor Hannah Gutierrez-Reed for their inexcusable actions. She was likewise excused from the House floor vote in February on a proposed state budget that included $360,000 in additional special prosecution expenses for the shooting. Mr. Baldwin and Halyna Gutierrez-Reed have both pleaded not guilty to the charges of involuntary manslaughter in the shooting death of cinematographer Halyna Hutchins. The charges carry a maximum penalty of 18 months in prison. Hutchins died shortly after being wounded October 21st, 2021, during rehearsals at a ranch on the outskirts of Santa Fe. Mr. Baldwin was pointing a pistol at Miss Hutchins when the gun officially went off, killing her and wounding, nearly fatally, director Joel Souza. A likely preliminary hearing is still months away to decide whether evidence is sufficient to proceed to trial. Prosecutor's State Assistant Director David Halls, who oversaw the safety on set, has signed the agreement to plead guilty in the negligent use of a deadly weapon. So if this was just simply a routine accident, right, then why would the production director David Halls, who was directly beside Mr. Baldwin when it came to Russ, right, why would he plead guilty? Yeah, so that kind of proves once and for all that this was much more purposeful, that there were elements of this that were certainly sinister, and it was not an accident, as some have, continually kept trying to reinforce. And that's a key issue. Ms. Reed was listed as a sponsor or co-sponsor on the Criminal Justice Initiative, including enhanced punishment for firearms violations, as legislatures explore ways to rein in surging violent crime. She previously served as the DA for the Judicial District on the Eastern Plains of New Mexico. So this is interesting, It's proof that this most certainly couldn't have just been a rehearsal, If it was really just a routine rehearsal, right, would we have seen some of the interesting complications that we ended up seeing? I mean, what are your feelings on that? What are your thoughts? Be sure to share in the comments what you see about that issue. But from what I'm understanding is, there's nothing about this that was routine. This wasn't just some kind of going through the motions rehearsal. Mr. Baldwin, because David Halls was also aware of everything occurring at the time, Mr. Baldwin most certainly had to have been aware to a good extent of what could possibly happen and what was going on set at the time. Thank you. I should pay attention again to his body language. He's kind of fidgeting a lot now with
somebody put a live round in the gun.
a piece of paper and
If that's a bullet,
similar things with his fingers.
then someone loaded a live round into the gun I was holding.
So now, let me ask you, did you see the rounds that were in the gun?
No.
Have you seen, throughout the whole time on set, have you seen what they look like?
I've watched her load and reload the gun many times.
Have you seen the bullets and stuff?
Well, meaning you see sometimes the head is the casing and the head is a pinched, it almost looks like a dumpling. It's closed at the top, there is no piece. And you put the cosmetic round in when you know you're going to see. If I hold the gun, if I say to you, what is your first name again?
Alex.
If I say to you, Alex, don't you move a muscle, darling, I'm going to blow you. The camera shoots me. You want to see the material in the cylinder, the cosmetic, clay-based, non-bullet round.
So can you describe to me what those...
Right. Now, I want you guys to pay very especially close attention to this. When he describes it so matter-of-factly, like you're going to absolutely see the clay base, in the round and so on. Does it sound to you like he's describing the actual incident, Does he sound very convincing to you? That he knows everything that goes on, with the clay base round and so on. Or does he sound a little bit more or less like you might expect to hear a movie director, right? Describing certain things that happen in a random movie that they watched, or perhaps a movie that they're involved with on the set, for example. Right? I don't know. What? Sound off in the comments. What is your real view, your viewpoint on that? You know, your overall opinion. I feel he sounds a little less convincing, right? He sounds kind of more like he's going through the motions of showing them, hey, guess what, everybody, you know, I'm the producer for Rust, so I clearly know everything about anything to do with firing pins, you know, and how firing pins work and things like that. When really, Alec Baldwin, you know, certainly does not. And when he hired the woman that he hired, you know, Halyna Gutierrez-Reed, that became very, very evident to everyone involved in the movie. So it's kind of an interesting catch-22. But I want you to pay especially close attention to this part for sure.
Forgive me because I'm very upset right now.
I know.
You know what I'm saying? So please don't forgive my weirdness about this. That's what came out of Joel's shoulder.
Yes. Yes. And the reason why I was showing it because you said you have experience, but you're saying when this does come out, it's supposed to just puff and...
Now notice how he really keeps coming back to his head a little bit, you know, touching his head with the forearm and things like that. That's a sign that Alec Baldwin is getting, you know, a little bit nervous at that point. You know, people aren't necessarily buying his version of events, his kind of story, if you will. So he's kind of realizing certain things, and he keeps touching his forehead because that's a sign of lying, right? Of him lying by omission, by not clearly stating certain details about the Rust incident that should have been known, you know, most likely at the very beginning when this started. And so it's a key aspect that I hope as you guys really watch this carefully, you know, you start to catch on. What are your personal feelings on that? Do you think that that Mr. Baldwin was doing that deliberately, or was it just, I don't know, by mistake perhaps, or was he simply, you know, really not being forthcoming about what happened? Thank you. We always enjoy hearing each of your ideas and your comments.
They were all had the holes in them.
Oh,
Sometimes he told him, when I wasn't familiar with this, they'll take the round, and if it's a cold round, it'll have the holes, and inside will be BBs, and you shake it.
yeah.
When you shake the BB, it's an acoustic thing to tell you that's a cold round.
Okay. And yeah, that's what...
The inside, this base, is stuff that rattles, little BBs that rattle. So you take it, you go, that's a cold round, that goes in the gun.
Okay. And that's what you're supposed to have today.
I was supposed to have an empty gun,
Empty.
or when we shot, for the rehearsal, empty.
Mm-hmm.
And then when we shot, the flash rounds, and everybody preps. And then she says, hot gun. She announces it, and the crew gets...
Now you see the way that he keeps motioning his hands a lot. This is not the signal of someone who is, it certainly is not, right? The signal of someone who is innocent. So he's kind of, I guess you may say, shifting his story a bit, you know, here and there, right, as time goes on. Because clearly the things that he's explaining are not actually what happened during the Rust shooting incident. And the way that he just, you know, off the cuff hired Halyna Gutierrez-Reed also makes that a little bit self-evident, wouldn't you think? Right? Because there's something about doing something like that, just, you know, out of left field like that, that feels like Mr. Baldwin is just not being forthcoming about anything that deals with the truth.
On the bench, sitting. I'm right here to the right. I'm all the way to one side. They wanted me to go all the way to that side. And the camera guy was here. He's behind. Hannah was here. Joel was here. Where the other people, I believe that the script woman is always in that corner so she can see the action. And when I shot the gun away from the cameraman, I always aimed the gun at the camera. I turned and I went like this to stay in the camera, and she was there, and the gun went off, and she just went right on the ground.
What about the armorer, though? Or was she?
She's outside.
Okay.
So he's very nervous there because he's kind of stretching the truth a bit, right? The armorer in that case was certainly much closer by than he indicates or begins to claim in the interview. And there are other parts of this interview where he most likely was telling the most true version of events that he knew, because he's certainly not. You can't expect Mr. Baldwin to be the resident expert of every single detail that goes on, right, during a incident like that. But I found it very, very fascinating to witness this. And so he rubs his fingers together at a certain point,
I would imagine, well, there's the
like right here.
So that's probably
Starts rubbing them together quite a bit,
And there's-
and he kind of tries to make this pretend bullet to try to show, how certain things played out, and it's very revealing. It's really quite eye-opening. So I wish for you guys to pay especially close attention to that. Thank you. It's to see, this is the Bonanza Creek Ranch. This is the area, the direct area where the rust incident finally ended up taking place. And Miss Halyna Hutchins, she sustained at least one, actually it appears nearly two wounds that were quite severe and life-threatening. The main shot of which, of course, is what led to her being declared deceased at the hospital. But what I wanted to point out here, right, is the Bonanza Creek Ranch is most certainly a very interesting location to shoot films or anything like that, because this isn't high school or anything, right? I mean, we don't see, in this instance at least, we don't see like kind of a paper mache style movie set, with different little almost pop-up buildings like you would expect most of the time. They're kind of fold-up style buildings that you'd see in Hollywood Boulevard or something similar to that in effect, right, folks? We don't actually see that at the Bonanza Creek Ranch. We see actual real buildings that are very, very solid, with a solid history, from a real town that's, kind of adjacent right there to Santa Fe, New Mexico. And so I wanted to point this fact out first thing for you folks, because it changes the alibi, the ability of Mr. Baldwin's alibi to really hold much weight to it, right? Because if this was just kind of a pop-up style movie set where the consequences, be damned, and it's just, another day over on the boulevard type of thing, then we would certainly see the standard kind of buildings that are fold-up buildings that kind of blow away in the wind within the next day or the next week after a movie, or parts of a movie anyway, have been completed, so to speak, right? But we don't really see any of that, because that's not actually what Bonanza Creek Ranch is. And that adds far more weight to the idea and the analogy, right? That Mr. Baldwin, when he picked up the revolver, the gun, and pointed it at Halyna Hutchins in that particular case, knew exactly what he was doing to a certain extent, because this is right. This is far from just some kind of newfangled movie set. This is a real town with a real history, and when you put it that way, it makes the consequences for what Mr. Baldwin did all the more glaring in certain respects, doesn't it? Yeah. You would start to think that, wouldn't you? But again, I always love to hear your feedback, so feel free to sound off in the comments below what you're starting to think. But my feeling of it most certainly is, due in part to the fact that it is a real place, a real town, that it does have a real saloon, and that it does have real people who go there every day, and they go to the corner store, they go, for example, to the gun store, and they start looking over the range and see, whether anybody has anything new there, or has their horses out on the range, so to speak. That it makes the reality of the situation that occurred here a little more severe, doesn't it? Makes it feel a little more real, with real consequences. And that when he picked up the gun, which, by the way, I'll show you part of the story. Now they're claiming Alec Baldwin actually destroyed the gun that was used during the Russ shooting. That when he picked up the gun, he knew that there was very much going to be real consequences for doing that. Given the fact that Mr. Baldwin was heavily in debt, he allegedly had a debt load of more than $100,000. Some are saying, much clearly higher than that. And to be here on set, kind of going through the motions, just for the sake of part of a movie or something like that, it no longer passes the muster. Yeah, I would say it doesn't fulfill the requirements of what really happened here. And so essentially what that means, folks, is Alec Baldwin knew that he was shooting Halyna Hutchins deliberately, in a way, and that makes things a little more severe in that regard. He didn't know that he was shooting her necessarily with a real gun. He probably presumed, at least to a certain degree, he would shoot her with a prop gun of some type, because he wasn't really as I don't know what you want to call it, but he wasn't really as stable, I would say, at the time. So he probably was thinking that he would shoot her and that he would shoot Joel with a prop gun to let off some steam. But again, it doesn't change the fact at all that in the back of his mind, right, what could potentially occur there, due to the fact he never checked anything about the firing pin, he never checked anything about the inside or outside of the chambers, he never checked anything about anything to do with the lock or the locking mechanism, that what that really could signify, right, could mean that what he was doing was actually intentionally shooting at least two people. And that's the key ingredient here that I want people to be brought back to as it concerns this, because again, these are charges of manslaughter, involuntary manslaughter, and that carries a lot of weight, especially carries a lot of weight in New Mexico. and you see this is not any kind of a melodrama set. This isn't like anything to do with the boardwalk or anything similar. This is a real town. These are real buildings, some which have been here for much, much longer than the town. And so the consequences are just as real, as the buildings. And in that particular case, when Joel Souza, when Halyna Hutchins met the terrible fate that they in fact met, you would presume that Alec Baldwin would have had to know, most certainly, that that could occur, given that he was in a very real town, a real industry, a real part of Santa Fe, New Mexico's heritage. Thank you. More to examine. Important details I want folks to really be pondering and paying attention to here is the story of Halyna Gutierrez-Reed, who was the official daughter of legendary armorer for set productions, Mr. Thel Reed, right? So Rust armorer Halyna Gutierrez-Reed was officially charged with 2 counts of involuntary manslaughter in January of 2023 in connection to the involvement that was witnessed on the set of Rust at the Bonanza Creek Ranch in New Mexico. On February 20th of 2023, the firearm enhancement charge was dropped, meaning they now face up to 18 months in prison. Information about the fatal shooting on the set of the movie Rust was revealed by authorities after the fatal incident took place, including details about the alleged prop gun that was fired by Baldwin and killed cinematographer Halyna Hutchins. So one of the key factors that's really been going around the circle about this whole overall ordeal, right, is the fact that Halyna Gutierrez-Reed, she had a history that was an interesting history of placing certain rounds in the chambers for guns. And on at least one other occasion in a prior movie that Miss Halyna Reed worked on, she would place different rounds in the chamber for guns that were clearly live ammunition or live rounds. There would be rounds in there that you couldn't really explain on first glance, but there were rounds in there that were very obviously live rounds. And so that made people start to question the whole aspect of whether or not Halyna Gutierrez-Reed really just made a mistake, when she was doing the alleged things that she was doing on set, right? Because it's kind of unusual, certainly in any kind of production, for someone to automatically, just without even looking, place live rounds, or what were conclusively proven to be live rounds, in another movie production, into the chamber of just a gun that's, an alleged prop. Now, I say alleged because there are conflicting statements now, of course, also from people who are close to Mr. Souza, of whether or not the gun was ever truly a prop gun. And that's been going, it's been in the rounds for quite a bit. I would say it's certainly possible it was a real gun, right? Because why would Miss Halyna Gutierrez-Reed truly be so careless as to place different chambers, especially, or different rounds, especially live rounds and so on, inside the chambers and inside the area where the pin drops to just a prop gun? So I would say it's certainly plausible that it was actually a real revolver. Yeah, that's the key one of the key details a lot of people have overlooked. As Halls handed the gun over to Alec Baldwin, he stated that this was a cold gun before the incident occurred. See, so all I have kind of pointed out since the beginning with this, folks, is if Mr. Baldwin truly, he just completely blanked out, and this was all an accident, right? Why was there a need to lie, to omit information in the interview that he ends up having with the authorities? Why was there the need then to lie at least 2 different times to detectives about what truly happened and whether or not there was a live round in the chamber near the firing pin? It's a understanding I've had since I've started to really dissect this case that Mr. Baldwin may well have known all along there could have been a live round in the chamber directly by the firing pin, which explains why he ended up being quite deceptive, doesn't it? Because if he was truly, as they say, in Miami and so on, if he was truly innocent, right, he would not have any reason to not be forthcoming and to truly tell everything that happened the exact way that he witnessed it. But he is, you see it kind of in the later interview, he is very reluctant to speak about what happened. He seems to hold and withhold certain information, right? So it's clear from his body language that he's lying directly to investigators, either out of fear of, maybe he made a major mistake and accidentally killed somebody, or real fear in his conscience about the fact that, yeah, he had more than enough reason to know, meaning he knew better to a certain extent that this could potentially happen, but he blotted it out of his mind rather than, shouting to someone, well, let's go ahead and check the guns and check the firing pin. It's always good to be sure. He didn't do anything like that, even though his conscience was telling him that the entire time, right? Because he had had a bad week. He had a lot going on. It's clear from the debt that he accumulated. There were other factors in play, right? Wouldn't you say? What are your feelings and ideas? Feel free to share those in the comments below. But I would say there was other factors in play. He was feeling the guilt, and so he couldn't bring himself to say anything because he would rather that he accidentally shot somebody and it created a problem than scream about it on the set, even though he knew most certainly that it could end in the loss of life, which is a very, very serious thing. So as people have most certainly pointed out a lot, it's very clear to me, included, based upon Mr. Baldwin's body language, that he was aware, most certainly, that there could be a live round in the chamber at that time. And he ignored all that and did what he did regardless, in spite of that. And therefore the involuntary manslaughter charge is certainly appropriate because he is guilty of not doing his due diligence with not only the firearms, but just speaking up on set in general. He's supposed to be the producer, the one who's in charge, right, of every single element that occurs in this movie set or in this movie, allegedly. And yet he's not really doing anything, right? He's not lifting a finger to truly get to the bottom of whether all these things are working together perfectly in unison. His mind is not over there. It's not at that point of time in the interview that he gives, and it's not at that point even when he's there on the set. You know, it's clear his mind is, for better or worse, it's elsewhere. It's focused on personal problems that he has. It may be focused on the debt that he was carrying. But what's interesting is it's not focused on Halyna Gutierrez-Reed and whether or not that gun was loaded with blanks or not. And it recounts a story, you know. Halyna Gutierrez-Reed loaded a gun during production and handed it to a child actor without properly ever checking whether the weapon could misfire. Filming was stopped by crew members who intervened and demanded that Gutierrez-Reed properly check the firearm. So she was already criminally negligent in several cases. And because Mr. Baldwin was so far, you know, right, his mind was elsewhere. Wouldn't you say that it was elsewhere? Because Mr. Baldwin was so far in debt and he had other issues he was looking at, he didn't care at all to check what had truly happened with Mrs. Reed, nor does it really seem that he cared much about most of the issues that were occurring on set at the time, you know. And there could be an argument made there that, you know, perhaps he did have a little bit of malice, feeling of malice for certain crew members. Perhaps he had a little bit of that going on for Mr. Souza and for Hutchins. You know, it's hard to be able to tell without seeing the full scene. But certainly at the time this took place, folks, and this is unarguable now, Alec Baldwin's mind was not at all on gun safety. It was not on the particular issues of the set. It was as far removed from that as you can possibly get, right? And in a way, it was more focused on Alec Baldwin than on anyone else. So thank you. Be sure to let everyone know your ideas and spread the word. Officially disclosed Thursday that the prop gun used by method actor Alec Baldwin in the 2021 fatal shooting on a New Mexico film set was destroyed, they claim. The revelation came during a status hearing for the original case against Baldwin, who was holding the gun when it discharged on the set of Rust on October 21st, 2021. At the time, cinematographer Halyna Hutchins was killed and director Joel Souza was wounded, nearly fatally, in the shooting. Baldwin was charged with involuntary manslaughter. He maintains he never pulled the trigger of the Colt revolver at all. Alex Spiro, the defense attorney, stated during the status hearing that prosecutors had informed them the 1800s gun was destroyed, they claim. That's obviously an issue, and we're going to have to see the firearm or what's left. The prosecution did not dispute whether the gun was destroyed or was in pieces as a result. Baldwin and armorer Halyna Gutierrez-Reed were both charged with manslaughter in the death of Halyna Hutchins. During the so-called rehearsal, Alec Baldwin pointed a revolver at Hutchins and Souza, and then it discharged directly afterward. The gun, which was not required to be fired in the scene, had been loaded with live rounds at the time, and they claimed the live rounds were actually in the chamber still when Hutchins was shot. Souza was also injured after the round passed through Hutchins and then hit him as a result. An alleged FBI forensic report concluded the gun could not have been fired without pulling the trigger as well. It's very interesting. The gun for the Rush shooting was used as target practice and in the commission of target practice by crew members, they claimed. Before the actual official shooting, Joel Souza told police they had taken a break for lunch. When they returned from lunch to continue rehearsing, he indicated that he was not sure if the gun in the scene had been checked. According to the official affidavit, he stated to his knowledge all firearms on set were checked by armorer Halyna Gutierrez-Reed, and then by assistant director Dave Halls, who handed the gun to the actor. Per the affidavit, Halls yelled "cold gun" before the firearm was handed to Mr. Baldwin, indicating that there were no live rounds in the gun. When he was given the firearm, Alec Baldwin, age 63, was practicing a cross draw and sitting in a pew in the church, according to what Mr. Souza told the police. Mr. Souza stated he was standing behind Hutchins when he heard what sounded like a whip and then a loud pop as well. He told police he remembered Halyna Hutchins complaining about her stomach and grabbing her midsection before she began to stumble backwards and was assisted on the ground. Mr. Souza explained that he was bleeding from his shoulder and he could see blood on Halyna Hutchins, while Russell also remembered Joel had blood on his person and Hutchins speaking and saying she could not feel her legs now. Souza stated the incident was not filmed because they were just working on setting up the camera. Russell also shared with police that Baldwin had been very careful with the firearms on set, recalling that the actor had made sure it was safe and that a child wasn't near him when they were discharging a firearm during a prior scene. Again, this somewhat contradicts other testimony from the actual set. So I will leave it up to each of you folks to decide, of course. What do you really feel about this so far? Sound off in the comments. What are your particular ideas? Do you think that Mr. Baldwin is indeed stretching the truth? That he had checked the gun multiple times? I mean, by everything that's come out thus far, it looks like he just picked it up, aimed it, and fired it, at the camera or towards the camera, without really checking anything about it at all. He just he seemed to not really care. He just took the word of whoever it was that were doing what they were doing, and just presumed that he could, shoot somebody with a rubber bullet, so to speak. But again, is this really the mindset of an innocent person? Or is this more or less the mindset of someone who is very possibly exhibiting signs of criminal negligence at a minimum? Right? Something very, very vital to really consider and truly begin to ponder, okay? Especially for you guys. There are no words to convey my shock and sadness regarding the tragic incident that it took the life of Halyna Hutchins, the most deeply admired colleague of ours and wife as well as mother. I am fully cooperating with the investigation to address how this tragedy occurred, and I am in touch with her husband now, offering support to the family. My heart is broken for her husband, their son, and all who knew and loved Halyna. Hutchins' husband Matthew also opened up, stating, I don't think there are words to communicate the situation that's unfolded. I am not going to be able to comment about the facts or the process of what we are going through right now, but I appreciate that everyone has been very sympathetic. I think that we will need a little more time before we can truly encapsulate her life in a way that is easy to convey to all involved. So very fascinating. It's additional insight into his account of what happened before the gun went off, as well as communication with Hutchins' husband Matthew after the fact. It characterizes his involvement as a producer as having been on the creative side, such as casting, seemingly in response to suits from crew members who allege the producers in charge of the budget and hiring deliberately endangered lives by cutting costs for the production. So that's a very serious point, right? Because what we need to all be really pondering is, how is this affected, as shown in the prior pictures I displayed for you? How has this really affected the family of Miss Halyna Hutchins? How has it affected them? You know, this is a tragic incident all the way around. But the costs that it has and that it has had cannot ever be understated, you know, in any way. The filing shifts the blame by stating that someone is culpable for chambering the live round, which led to the tragedy, and it is someone who could not be Alec Baldwin, because Alec Baldwin is an actor. The Washington Post requested comment from both Rust Movie Production LLC and Ryan Smith Production Company. On October 21st, Baldwin was inside a church on Bonanza Creek Ranch in Santa Fe, New Mexico, along with others working on the Rust set, which included Hutchins and director Joel Souza. Detectives with the Santa Fe County Sheriff's Office determined from numerous interviews that Assistant Director Dave Halls retrieved an actual .45 long Colt revolver from armorer Halyna Gutierrez-Reed and announced it was a cold gun before then handing it to Baldwin. The industry term is used to indicate there are no live rounds. The gun eventually went off in Baldwin's hands, then killing Miss Hutchins and injuring Mr. Souza. Halls has remained mostly quiet regarding the case. Well, of course he would, because some of the testimony that Halls ends up providing is fairly incriminating to Mr. Baldwin. Wouldn't you say, folks? Would you say that sounds pretty close to the mark? Yeah. I would say that's certainly very likely. And he was handed the gun, he said, having worked with Hutchins to determine how they wanted to angle the camera for a specific scene. He said she directed him to point the gun toward her and agree when he asked if she wanted to see him cock the gun, as the script had noted. She stated yes, and he pulled the hammer back deliberately. When Baldwin let go of the hammer, the gun discharged the live round. In February, attorneys representing Hutchins' family named Baldwin among numerous other producers and crew members in a wrongful death suit. Matthew Hutchins told the Today anchor's Hoda Kotb soon afterward that he was angry watching Baldwin deny culpability in such an obvious incident. Hearing him blame Halyna in the interview and shift responsibility to others and see him cry just felt, wrong. There was something that just felt off. Mr. Baldwin's filing includes screen images of cordial text messages exchanged between Baldwin and Matthew Hutchins as early as the day after the fatal incident. Weeks later, Baldwin texted Matthew saying that the latter's attorney told Baldwin to stop contacting Matthew Hutchins, but the two continued to reach out in spite of their family's own well-being. The filing states that before Hutchins' appearance on the Today Show, his interactions with Baldwin had only been polite, collaborative, and at times warm. The filing notes that Baldwin tried to propose a settlement with the Hutchins family that would have involved finishing Rust and compensating them from the actual profits and proceeds. Crew members including script supervisor Mommy Mitchell, medic Sherlyn Schaefer, and chief lighting technician Serge Savetnoy have filed suit over the Rust shooting, pointing to producers' negligence and claiming emotional distress as a result. After Miss Hutchins' death, Savetnoy wrote a scathing Facebook post that accused the producers of hiring inexperienced workers. Well, not only that, they hired perhaps the last person that they would wish to have in that type of a movie situation. Someone who had been in trouble before, who had been in trouble with the law, who had deliberately placed in a few instances, it deliberately placed live rounds into an actual gun and a prop gun. And these are all key issues, folks, you know. And these are what we end up having to deal with after. To mention was the issue of Halyna Gutierrez-Reed. She was kind of connected to some interesting folks. One of the key players in the incident is Halyna Gutierrez-Reed, a 24-year-old who had little experience and was ultimately hired as the set's armorer who was put in charge of the weapons cache. According to the IMDb profile, Miss Gutierrez-Reed only ever worked on 2 distinct separate films, and one of those was as the official costume assistant. The other was as a head armorer on Brett Donahue's The Old Way, in which Nicolas Cage plays an aging gunslinger whose past catches up with him. But the Rap is reporting that Gutierrez-Reed, who is the daughter of noted weapons expert Thel Reed, served as the gun coach and armorer on several major productions, which included L.A. Confidential, Miami Vice, and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and was the subject of complaints. In fact, also, she and a few of her associates were the subject of complaints by Nicolas Cage and other actors. So she was connected to some pretty interesting folks that, you know, not the type of person that you would ever wish to hire for full-fledged professional production, right? You know, that's one of the key issues we had to look at. What are your thoughts? What are your ideas on that? Make sure to sound off down below here. Stu Brumbaugh, who served as key grip on the Cage Western The Old Way, told the Rap that Gutierrez-Reed upset Nicolas Cage and other crew members on the Montana production by failing to follow basic gun safety protocols and announcing the arrival and usage of weapons on set. After firing a gun near the cast and crew a second time without warning during the 3 days of shooting, Brumbaugh stated that Cage yelled at her and made an announcement, "You almost blew my eardrums out," before walking off set. After the second round, I was quite flummoxed. While an unnamed producer on The Old Way dismissed the story of the outburst that suggested Gutierrez-Reed be fired, Brumbaugh and another member of the production claimed that the young armorer's inexperience was definitely past being problematic and almost most certainly rose to the level of dangerous. So that, you know, that kills the idea of it just being a simple accident. She tucked pistols under her armpits and carried rifles in each hand that were ready to be used on the set, as well as firearms which were aimed at people. So she was, part of the biggest problem there was she was very inexperienced, you know. She was connected to some interesting characters, allegedly some, you know, shady folks, but also she had been on set at several different movies that did not go well. And that's the most important point right there. You would expect, you know, in a movie like The Old Way, for example, they would have somebody there who's a 30-year veteran, you know, an expert, who would be handling everything to do with the armoring. At that time, it was only Halyna Gutierrez-Reed for the most part, which is not a good, you know, not a good outcome. The best part about my job, she stated, is showing people who are normally freaked out by guns how safe they can be and how they are not really problematic, unless in the wrong hands. Yeah, well, we now know that she at minimum needed a lot more training when it came to anything to do with any kind of mainstream films or any kind of productions, right? Very interesting indeed. Make sure to add your own insights to this. Thank you. That was Rust with Alec Baldwin. Very interesting case overall. Has a lot of interesting components there. Be sure to like it, share it, and get this out to the general public so many more know about what took place with Mr. Baldwin in Santa Fe, New Mexico. See you next time.